So, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming. This was a really hard time to give a lecture. Everyone got off of an excursion of one sort or another. Nobody had lunch. So I think most of our friends are up in the World Cafe eating something in order to try to sustain them for the rest of the evening. So I am very happy to be able to talk to you about Boria. One of the reasons is completely self-indulgent. This is a theater form that I've been researching for quite some time, and I'm really excited to tell you about it. And it's an interesting question as to why you should be interested in an esoteric theater form that maybe you'll never ever have a chance to see. And one of the reasons is because this theater form, like all theater, is a snapshot of a culture. It encapsulates the values, the cultural symbols and things that are important in a society. And in the case of Boria, it also encapsulates the history of the people of Penang from a long time ago, from several centuries ago down to the present. So packed in this one rather entertaining theater form, you have all kinds of meaning that lies underneath, that lies behind the performance itself. And understanding that helps you to understand the people of Penang and why the people of Penang are so special. I've showed some clips of Boria to some of my other friends in Kuala Lumpur and also today when we were out on excursion. They look at the Boria clips and they immediately know what it is. They say, Boria. And I say, yeah, and have you ever seen it? And they say, well, you know, it's really special for Penang. It's not something that we generally do ourselves. It's not entirely true. Boria has been performed all over Malaysia, but it is primarily associated with Penang. And the performance form there is very important. So, Boria is a popular theater in Penang. It is a central Malay theater tradition, and it combines comedy, song, and dance in a community performance that's geared to the specific community in Penang, and in some cases, in many over history, in many communities in Penang. It reflects Penang's urban character and also its cosmopolitan history, with many, many cultural influences coming through. So, it also is important to talk about this, and actually the other lectures that I'm going to be giving will take this framework. It's a fusion of music, text, and dance. And for those of us who study performance, we know that the music, text, dance kind of performance form is actually the most normal kind of performance form in the entire world. Spoken drama is quite rare. And we have our own versions in Western culture with musical comedy and also opera. Music, text, and dance. It seems that human beings just love to get up and sing and dance and tell stories that way. And this is one of the most important vehicles for transmitting culture to younger people, but also to reinforcing the cultural traditions of a particular society for the people who live in it. So, what is Boria? The word Boria has, we're not really clear what it exactly means, but because, as I'll tell you, it was transmitted to Penang from India and much earlier from Iran. The term Boria in Tamil refers to being crazy, insane. And it's partly because the performance itself is kind of wild and woolly in many, many cases. It's comedy. But there's another word for Boria, which means mat on the floor. And this could also have to do with the place where Boria is performed. So, crazy people on a mat. That's one way to think about the performance. So it is this Malay popular theater centered in Penang. And the important point, the historical point that is important is that these performances traditionally took place during the month of Muharram. Muharram is the first lunar month in the Islamic calendar. And it's that fact that gives us a clue to the historical origins of this performance form. So the first month of the Islamic lunar calendar was the time when Boria was traditionally performed in Penang. So this form uses comedy and collective participation with a lot of audience in interaction as well. And it is also important to contrast Boria with Bangsawan, which I had given a previous lecture on. Bangsawan being an epic drama dealing with gods and with nobility and with legends and epic taking place in a noble court situation, rather formal. And this kind of theater, which is really street theater, it's a theater that takes place in the open, in a popular setting, and it is comedic and improvisatory as opposed to scripted. So these two performance forms in Malaysia complement each other for that reason. It is not then, therefore, a literary drama. There's a great deal of improvisation. There is one item that is scripted, and that is there's a song that takes place in Boria, in the second half of Boria, which is in fact composed, and there's poetry that's involved with that. But otherwise, it is freewheeling and very, very comedic in an improvisatory fashion. So also the important thing is that for its appeal, it has to be rooted in the everyday life of people and address the concerns that they actually have. In the West, one of the forms that we think about might be thought of as observational comedy. That is when you have a comedian who's up on the stage and is saying things like, "Did you ever notice that when you get to the subway, the door's always shut in your face?" This is the kind of observational comedy that reflects everyday life for individuals. And this is how Boria actually engages with the audience as well. So why should we study it? First of all, it reveals everyday Malay social concerns, and it becomes a medium for audience engagement, audience interaction. And also for social critique. And one of the things that we know about comedy is that comedy is a kind of get out of jail free zone in performance. If you can place something in a comedic frame, you can have very, very trenchant critique of society, and you're not going to get in trouble for it because it's comedy. It's considered to be performance, and comedy has a kind of a sacrosanct quality, even in societies which are very strict with regard to personal expression. So comedy is a great, great vehicle for bringing up issues that are uncomfortable in everyday life, but can be addressed through a comedic performance. So humor allows the discussion of sensitive topics, and sometimes even topics that would be maybe taboo in a social salon. So things that you wouldn't be able to discuss with your grandmother might be able to be discussed in a comedic framework in a form like Boria. So it also is important to note that Boria and Bangsawan are taking place in a Muslim society. So this is a performance form that is based in an Islamic society, and the Islamic society of Malaysia is distinct and different from many other parts of the Islamic world, and it allows this kind of performance to go on and to be expressed without difficulty in social terms. So it also complements the other theatrical traditions that I have been talking about, namely Bangsawan. And reflects the lived cultural experience of the people. So, historical context. I mentioned to you before that Boria is an encapsulation of the history of migration and different ethnic groups coming to Penang. And that is facilitated by the fact that Penang was a port town, and perhaps the most important port town in the Indian Ocean at one point. It was in a 19th century place where goods were warehoused, they were traded, and trade came from everywhere. It came from the Persian Gulf area with Arabs, it came from India, and eventually it came from Europe as well. So we had in Penang an incredible mixture of different ethnic sensibilities and different ethnic groups. Chinese were also there, and other Southeast Asian populations. So because it was this major port city, it hosted these diverse ethnic communities. And the interaction then shaped these performance traditions. So the cultural exchange between these various societies influenced these theatrical forms. Now, we have early references to Boria from around 1845. The earliest one dates from the observations of a British traveler in 1845 who talks about these performances taking place during the month of Muharram. So that is the earliest mention that we've been able to find in documentary literature. It's probably the case that Boria was done and performed much, much earlier than this, but it was only when it was noticed by a chronicler writing in European language that we were able to finally to document that someone had actually witnessed it and the dates from which they had witnessed it. So the sources in from 1845 link Boria to Indian Muslim traditions. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting because, as I mentioned, performances took place during the first lunar month of the Islamic calendar, and the early performers were largely Indian and largely Muslim, and their performances were noted again by European travelers. So eventually the Indian performers were replaced by Malay performers. So there was a swapping out of the actors and performers that were actually taking place. So we see the Indians being replaced by Malay performers gradually over the course of an entire century. Now, one of the reasons that this took place is because the original Indian performers were soldiers. They came from India and were sepoy soldiers. Sepoy is a word that means in Persian soldier, and the sepoys were recruits from India that were hired by the British in order to supplement their military forces throughout India. They came from Bombay, they came from the north, and they also came from southeast India. So the sepoys included Shia Muslims who had been associated with a kind of theatrical form that came originally from Iran in Shiism, that mourned the death of Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, who was martyred in the year 630 and is the most important religious figure in Shiism. So during the month of Muharram, when he was actually murdered historically, the mourning ceremonies that take place developed into a really elaborate theatrical form. And these sepoy soldiers were used to these performances during Muharram, and when they came to Penang, they continued them. Now, gradually, the performances stopped being entirely religious and started being much more secular. So we have a transformation of religious performance into secular performance over the course of a century, and a transformation of the performers from Indian soldiers to Malay lay people and actors that were carrying on the tradition without necessarily the religious ideology that underlay that particular tradition. So entertainment then replaced this lamentation, and the meaning therefore shifted over time. Now I want to give you a little taste of what the original Tazieh performance, the original Iranian performance for the mourning of Imam Hussein looked like, because it's radically different than what eventually emerges as Boria. So this is quite a different thing than you will see with Boria. But we go on, and we realize that there really are debates about these origins. As happens in scholarship, somebody puts forward a theory, and somebody else comes along and says, well, I have another theory, and we debate these things. So the debate continues on. So we're not sure whether the Indian origins and the Persian origins are really justified as part of what we're saying. So and partly the reason is because we have these 19th century resources that are not entirely conclusive, and they're very scant. So we rely on the analysis of thematic material in order to be able to create the historical connection that would justify what we're actually positing about this kind of performance form. Let's see now. My thing is not advancing. Okay, so Boria then transformed rather than declined, and the religious elements diminished as the popular elements gradually replaced them. And what happens is that tragedy in the original Tazia performances transformed into comedy. A lot of and these Malay troops then replaced the Indian sepoys, who were the original performers in the Muharram ceremonies. And community engagement actually increased in all of these areas. So, let's look at the basic performance structure for Boria. Boria consists of a stable two-part structure. The first part is a comic structure, which is a comic sketch that deals with a contemporary social issue or social problem, or it could be satire. It could satire a historical or contemporary event. Then the second part is a song and dance finale. And the song and dance finale relates to the original sketch. So there's a single theme, the sketch has one theme, and then the song and dance reflects that theme in a kind of a vaudeville performance that takes place. And I'll show you some examples here. So the song and dance finale then follows the comedy sketch. Both elements then are interdependent in their dealings with each other. So here's an example of the comic sketch. You won't be able to understand the Malay, and in fact, many people in Malaysia will not be able to will not be able to understand this because it's performed in a Penang Malay dialect, which is very, very localized. People recognize it as a Malay dialect, Malay slang, but they may not be able to understand it in Kuala Lumpur. This particular sketch has to do with dealing with the cost of living and how you get food for your family, how you actually are able to how you're able to deal with everyday expenses. And this gentleman in the gentleman here he's trying to give advice to the ladies, and this older woman is criticizing him, saying, "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how to deal with the market. You don't know how to get food." And the woman in the middle, a rather modern woman, is trying to mediate between these two arguments. So the sketch is improvised or semi-improvised, and it uses this Penang Malay dialect. The themes are very, as I've mentioned to you, very topical and very local, and the authority figures then are satirized. So in this particular sketch, they're talking about the minister of the economy, and the older woman is saying, "I bet he doesn't have to buy his own food." So in that way, it is a critique of the government at the same time that it is done in a comic form. So these frustrations are dramatized. So the audience recognition then becomes immediate because they're dealing with such contemporary issues. Now, then the song and dance part of the performance takes this theme and makes it into a song, a routine. It typically before we're going to see this figure who's the leader of the song and dance routine, the Tukang Karan, and he is backed up by what used to be called sailors. Sailors were a nod to the nautical theme that historically underlay Boria. So they're still called sailors, even though they may have completely different costumes. So let's see this.
Segala segi cukup lengkap. Apa nak lagi? Kawan dan rakan, bawa nyonya kawin peranakan. Kawin Cina, berjalan kakikan. Boria hati homono, jadi rasakan. Kawin peranakan, kisah dah tamat. Serba sedikit.
So if you want something to eat, you have to work for it. That's what he's saying. If you want food, you have to go out and get it. And lazy people will never have enough to eat. So the finale shifts the tone, and this dance form dominates this performance. The movement is synchronized. These dances actually take place and are actually rehearsed. And the sailors behind are echoing the chorus of the song that the Tukang Karang, this leader, is actually dealing with. So the narrative action is paused in a breakout into melody and song. And what we see is an expansion of emotion. This is much like what we find again in Western operetta, musical comedy, and also opera, where the action stops in order for there to be an emotional expansion. As most of the songs that we sing, I think when I was giving my lecture on Bangsawan, I mentioned to you that I grew up in Oklahoma, and it's required for every high school student to appear in a production of Oklahoma before they can graduate. And so you have the opening song in Oklahoma. It's Curly out there on the prairie singing, "Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day." And it's an expansion of his emotional feeling. That's what we're getting here with the Tukang Karang and the sailors that are expressing an emotional expansion of the thoughts that were encapsulated in the comic performance. So the Tukang Karang carries a baton, and that's how you know who he is or her. And now we'll show you a female Tukang Karang in just a minute. So he leads the finale and sings and directs the group. Now, Tukang Karang, in modern times, many of them have become popular vocal artists because they are on stage, they're singing, they're doing these movements, and oftentimes they're very attractive people. They're supposed to be kind of the front people for the performance. And so many of them have become recording stars, television stars, and other forms of popular entertainment. So the sketch and the finale is linked by this figure, the singing, dancing figure, and the people who are backed up against him. Now you take a look at this. Particular group. You see that the Tukang Karang is dressed in a particular way, and all of the sailors who are behind him are dressed in the same costume. So when in Malaysia, when you see two people that are dressed exactly the same, people point to them and say Boria, because they're dressed in exactly the same costume. So that becomes an important kind of cultural reference for people who are actually dealing with this. So the humor in what he's doing establishes his leadership of the group and his leadership in the performance. So comedy as a social action, it reverses social hierarchies. This is true of comedy everywhere. The important people get denigrated. The lower class people or the more humble people get elevated, and you get role reversals all the time. This is also why you find you find travesty so often in comedy when gender roles get mixed up also. So anything that involves reversal of the normal social order is a very important touchstone for comedy. And in Boria, this is also the case. So these taboo topics become discussable within the comic frame, and criticism then avoids direct confrontation with authoritative figures or with, in social commentary. So I'm sure that you've all seen sketches, for instance, in the United States, Saturday Night Live. This is a prime example of how satire can work as social critique and still remain protected as a form of expression. So the laughter that emerges is born of recognition. So when an audience hears a piece of humor, a piece of satire, and they recognize it as a legitimate sending up of something that is problematic or that is odd or strange about their social situation, then they laugh together, and the common laughter is something that also creates unity within the community as a whole. So comedy unifies as well as serving as an important social critique. And the moral commentary then remains indirect. So the tukang, if we go back here, if you take a look at this sketch, this cartoon of a sketch, this man says, "I have a fancy car," and this other person, the second person, says, "Where?" And the woman points out, she says, "That's not a fancy car, that's a bus. So, stop bragging." And in the tukang karang part, the musical part of the performance, you get a commentary that says your life should not be pretending. You shouldn't try to place yourself in a higher status than you actually deserve or than you actually are. So when we have here's another example of a Boria sketch and a tukang karang and sailors that take place. In this particular sketch, the woman is talking about the fact that she has so much housework to do, and she's so burdened with what she's doing, and in particular, she doesn't like cooking, and so these two cooks are coming to her and they're saying that, you can learn to cook. Cooking's not so bad, and it can be fun too. She's saying, yes, but it's so much work, and they try to convince her that in fact, when cooking is done in the right way, then it is actually pleasurable, and it won't be work at all.
Tidur dekat mak.
Oh, kami pun tidur.
Ni, lagu.
Dengar.
Bah.
Oh, hantar itu kan? Hantar itu.
Ni, nak apa? Abang kan?
Makan.
Oh.
Ayah dah buat tak tahu dah dekat Malaysia.
Hey, buat
Dia buat tak tahu dia setiap hari dia keluar dia tinggal
Tu.
Malaysia hidup
Tapi,
sengsara.
Sudahlah, Manisa.
Sat. Walaupun dia tinggal hang lagu ni, tengok kami bagi makan hang lagu mana.
Hari Minggu
Dulu Malaysia kecil.
tu.
Lah ni hang tengok besar
Macam
mana.
mana? Lagi makan, lagi lebih ambil dah apa?
Abang Labi.
Dia hari-hari kita nak bagi bab kali bab.
Abang Labi kan pandai masak.
So now we get the second part of the sketch, and here we have the tukang karang, who's now a female chef, and all of the sailors are cooks with their aprons and with their toques, showing that cooking is great. And this is part of a contest that is taking place. So when we have this music functioning as enhanced speech, you are also fusing that with dance, which is symbolic movement, and the gestures communicate the ultimate meaning that they're trying to convey. So the costumes, as you see, are uniform, and they also send a message. And in this case, the message is about the virtues of cooking and the virtues of household management, with the cooks being the people who are inspiring the woman, and in the sketch, and then appearing the cooks appearing in the song and dance routine in order to emphasize the happiness that can come from this kind of activity. So the sailor image, as I said, reflects maritime identity, but other themes also occur, like this one. And we find this in many, many examples of Boria. So the stories and the themes are, as I mentioned, reflective of social dynamics within the community as a whole. Here's a sketch where the woman is saying, my house is bigger than yours, and the gentleman is saying, yeah, but I have a TV in my house. So this is an unequal comparison, but it's a kind of fake argument about status, and that is an important social dynamic that takes place throughout society in Malay society. In fact, it's something that takes place as an important dynamic in just about every society, if you think about it. So the politics and authority are critiqued, and the themes reflect modern change. And so we see the thematic material in Boria changing over time as social dynamics and historical developments take place within society. And so it becomes a kind of a snapshot at any point in time. The Boria that we might have seen in the 1930s or the 1920s, when it was much more popular and much more ubiquitous, is really different than what we see today, because the social problems have changed, as well as the political dynamics of the society. So the mythic narratives that we find in Bangsawan are absent. So in this performance, they represent social reality. So here we have youth versus age as one dynamic. So this person is saying, bro, chill out and respect your elders. The traditional versus modern values, the pious Muslim values versus secular values. All of these are reflected in the performance, in the Boria performance. The symbols then persuade and are and reinterpret experience for the audience and also for the performers themselves as they perform on stage. And the audience reacts to this performance and is part of the interpretation that's actually taking place. So in this way, the theater is more than just theater. It becomes social dialogue. And it becomes a way for people in a society to actually talk to each other and to reflect their own feelings as projected through the actions of the performer. Things that maybe people couldn't discuss in everyday life get reflected on the stage, and it becomes the possibility of actually thinking about and interpreting the social dynamics or the cultural dynamics that are taking place in a more substantial fashion. The performance space is what we call liminal. That means that it's protected, so that when you have a performer undergoing a performance, they are in a kind of sacred space where what they do is allowed merely because it takes place in the performance frame. And that is one of the most important, I think, dynamics when we talk about theater at all, when we talk about theater in any particular situation. So the everyday norms are suspended in the liminal performance space, and this allows for the kind of role inversion that I've talked to you about, and also the confrontation of these difficult topics. The critiques then emerge rather safely, and everyone is in a situation where they are protected from any kind of unpleasantness. The experimentation is also possible in all of these situations, and that's what we expect when we find artistry in almost any theater form. Then after the performance is over, the normal order returns and people go back to their everyday life. But having seen the performance, they are changed because they've confronted something that they otherwise would not have seen. They maybe have confronted ideas that they hadn't seen before, and they are altered in their thinking, in their framework, in their emotional state. And this is what we expect for all good performance forms. The troops, historically in Penang, were kampung-based. That means individual communities, individual sections of Penang Island and also parts of the mainland had their own Boria troops, and the communities would sponsor these performances, and they had contests. They had very extensive contests where troops would come and perform and receive prizes for what they did. So this meant that Boria was not just a performance that took place from time to time for a particular audience. It also became identified with particular communities, and the communities that could provide the most elaborate and the most professional and the most engaging performance were recipients of prestige as well as prizes, and they would actually point to their Boria performances as a matter of civic pride. A little bit like we have sports teams in various parts of the world that get identified with cities and with communities. So the Boria troops became identified with their particular community, and the quality of their work was then a source of pride for the communities. And as a result, the Boria performances became supported through local patronage. Now, Bangsawan, which I mentioned to you before in the last lecture, Bangsawan was a ticketed performance. That is, people sold tickets and they actually came to see performances on a proscenium stage. But Boria has been transformed into a patronage-supported performance. And as the communities have waned in their support of Boria, the government has stepped in. And as a result, we see now Boria not being done just during the month of Muharram, but also for other national holidays and for other government events. In particular, the Malaysian National Day, the Day of Malaysian Independence in August. So if you come to Malaysia during the celebrations for Malaysian Independence Day for August 31st, you'll see these performances all over the place as a matter of national pride. So the support then reflects the pride of the community in their performers, and the performance then affirms belonging to a particular community. Now, Boria, of course, transited into the media, and you see performances on television. Also, in Malay film, there may be a Boria sequence in a Malay film, and also on the radio. The song and dance routines that we see in Boria are also found in popular media. So the songs in particular became popular songs and were abstracted from the actual performance. The tukang karang might become a vocal artist that became popular in their own right. The improvisation became somewhat constrained when things were appearing on national television, because the humor was not as localized as it was before. And so local specificity declined somewhat. So I mentioned Bangsawan, which I gave an earlier lecture on. Bangsawan is Malay popular opera, emphasizes narrative and spectacle. The performances are professionally staged, and they are based on court drama, on epics, on legend, and are of a different quality than Bangsawan, than Boria. The scripts then structure their performances. So Bangsawan exists in relationship to Boria as a mirror image of the kinds of performance that we find in Boria. Boria, improvisatory, comic. Bangsawan, scripted and epic. And these two are both reflective of Malay culture and Malay society and Malay cultural values. So if we compare the two, then we see that the narrative and melodramatic Bangsawan gets contrasted with the comic and performative Boria. So the street performance then also contrasts with the stage performance in a proscenium. So the interesting thing about both Bangsawan and Boria is that they both have the same historical roots. They both came from India into Penang through the trade routes. In Bangsawan coming from the Parsi theater of Bombay, and Boria coming from the Sepoy Muslim soldiers that landed in Penang. But nevertheless, the movement from west to east was palpable and was the important dynamic that governed these two historical performance forms. And now, I mentioned to you before that this music, text, dance framework is essential when we're talking about any of these theaters. You can't talk about the themes or the text of a performance without understanding that it's also encapsulated in music and in dance. And the three forms go together, the three elements go together in every kind of performance that we talk about on a world stage. And this is absolutely the case with Boria and with Bangsawan. Together, these three elements convey and carry meaning. And the performance frames the experience that people have. So if we compare these, we see that there are similar frameworks, not just in Malaysia, but I will also be talking about dance drama in Thailand in my next lecture, and finally Kandyan dance drama in Sri Lanka. They're very different, they have very different historical origins, but the dynamic is the same. Music, text, dance to convey cultural meanings and to provide meaningful experiences for an audience, being reminded and having underscored their cultural values and traditions. So I should mention before we go that once again that Islam is is the underlying social structure of this performance form. And in Islam, you generally do not have performance forms of the kind that I'm talking about in the rest of the Islamic world. Iran has taziyeh, this mourning form, but the comic forms are not widely found. I was seated in a performance next to the Minister of Islamic Culture in Kuala Lumpur, and the Minister of Islamic Culture turned to me and he said, I want to point out to you that this is not going to be seen in any other Islamic country. We are very proud of the fact that we have these performance forms in Malaysia, and they are uniquely ours, and they are sanctioned by the Islamic Ministry. So that is a very important thing, and especially because women are important performers in both Bangsawan and Boria, and there's absolutely no problem with female performers in these performance forms in Malaysia. So there is Bangsawan, Boria is a living heritage. It resists fossilization, and the change ensures survival. It has great cultural significance for everyone. I'm a little bit over time, but I want to get to my final slide to show you something really fun. So Boria is central to Penang culture, but it also complements Bangsawan historically, and it is it is something that's worthy of study, not just as theater, but also as a cultural performance. So I want you to see the world's largest Boria performance, and this was done in 2014, and was specifically established in order to establish a world record. 10,000 performers.
Boria kami seiring bersatu, sukan MSSM sudahlah tentu. Kita
Okay, well maybe
semua saling membantu.
maybe that's enough. But 10,000 Boria performers, and that's something that's really epic, never been duplicated again. But if you ask almost anyone in Malaysia about this performance, they'll tell you that it was really something. It was really something to see. So I don't know if you ever in your life will be able to actually witness one of these performances, but I will tell you that it is important, and it's an important guide to understanding the really fundamental aspects of Malay society, and particularly the society of Penang. So thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it, and thanks to our technical crew here. They help us all tremendously in everything that we do in these lectures.